What's up guys, welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be making a knife out of Damascus with a little bit of copper in it. Here I'm stacking up my billet. I am starting with about 16 layers for my initial billet. And as always, I like to spray it down with a little WD-40 before I put it into the forge. Now, the reason why I spray it down with WD-40 is because once it burns down, it creates a little layer of soot that protects the layers from oxidization, and it gives me a nicer, cleaner, better forge weld. So here I'm just forging down my piece little by little. The goal for this forging session is to forge it down so I can restack it. So I'm looking for about the same width, but get it nice and thin, and I'm hoping to get about 4 stacks out of it. That way I can restack it, re-weld it, and get a higher layer count. And here I'm using my 1-inch kiss blocks to get it all down to the same thickness. So I did this off camera, but I pretty much just cut it and cleaned it and stacked it and got it ready for our next forge weld. So my first initial billet was, I believe, 16 layers. So with this I'm going to be hitting about 56 layers. 4 times 16 is 56, and my math isn't off, and if it is, please correct me in the comments down below. But yeah, we got about 56 layers in this guy. And my goal for this forging session is to forge it down to a 1 by 1 inch bar, from which I will take a little piece off for this project and leave the rest for a future project down the line. One thing that comes to mind as I'm going over this video and doing the voiceover is that since I've made this kiss blocks, they've really helped me out in getting me to forge a lot more symmetrical and a lot more even pieces. So definitely, if you have a press and you don't have any kiss blocks, definitely take the time and invest the money into making some or buying some, and as well make you some longer dies, because man, these things come in handy when it comes to straightening out the final pieces. Straightening it out by hammer would have been a lot of work. Doable, but a lot of work. And here's the little nub that I cut off, a little end piece, and I will be forging this down to be the cladding for our knife. This is more than enough material once I forge it down to about 1/8 of thickness. I won't deny it is a little awkward working with such a small piece, but once I get it down and stretched out enough, it's actually not too bad. And honestly, I didn't think I had enough steel when I started, but as I worked it down and got it to the thickness that I wanted and the width that I wanted, I realized that this is a very, very good amount of steel. Like, sometimes it's hard for me to visualize how much steel I'm actually using or how much steel I'm actually going to get out of it, but man, this could have been a very nice fillet knife, or maybe even 2 fillet knives after I had forged it out. But it will become the cladding for the knife that we're going to make, which I promise will be cool. And here I have my prep pieces. I got my copper, I got my core steel, which in this case is a piece of ADCR V2, and we have our outside cladding. I don't really like to show all the welding because I know the light's annoying, but for these billets you have to weld all the way around and make sure you have an airtight seal. That way you don't have any splatter. And be very, very careful with the heat. Make sure to not go over, I would say, 1900 degrees, just to be on the safe side. And yep, just take care of it and baby it. If not, you could have a lot of molten copper flying around everywhere. And I recently tried to do a brass knife that did not make it to video. I didn't even finish it, but that one exploded on me, and yeah, it's not fun. So definitely be careful whenever you're trying to make a cu-mai or a brass mai, whatever they're called. And I'm working this guy down to about an 1/8 thickness. That way I can do my cutout from there. Alright guys, so here's my billet. I've done a rough drawing of what I could actually fit in here. And I did this initial line just to draw around roughly where I think the good steel starts, because everything around the outside here is just the welding. That's why it's all cracked and stuff. And if I flip it over, you can kind of tell where the welding is and where it's not. So I just try to stay underneath that line. So once I actually cut this out, I'll be able to see on the spine of the knife if it actually is good steel, or if it has some weld in it, or some copper, you know, came out. Even though I didn't see any copper squish out while I was working it, so I'm very hopeful about that. But it should be a nice little butcher's knife. It's gonna be a little bit under 8 inches for cutting edge, so it's gonna be a pretty nice little slicer, and hopefully it comes out good. Next up, I'm gonna hit it with the grinder and cut off all the extra little pieces I don't need, and then we'll take it to the 2x72 to get that profile right. And this is just a service announcement for any of the uninformed people in the comments, because I always get them. Yes, I do have to cut out the knife. I cannot forge it out because it will peel. You don't really forge out copper blades like this because it will delaminate and cause problems down the line. I have tried it before, just slightly tapping it to, you know, bend it whenever it's a little bowed to one side, and even that, it's running a risk of damaging the layers on the inside. So it's always better to play it safe. In this case, I started with thinner material. That way I would have less waste overall. And by thinner, I mean less width, not thickness. And overall, it's definitely knocked down the amount of waste that I would have had on this knife had I used 2-inch stock or something like that. We are out of the temper. It's looking pretty good. You can see the Damascus coming out through it. Pretty good looking. I do have a little bit of a warp right around this area, so I'm gonna go ahead and straighten that out with the carbide peen hammer, and have some tight spots where the copper gets pretty close to the edge, which shouldn't be too much of a deal. It gets really close in some areas, but I might have to take a little bit of material off of this side with the surface grinder. That way it gets closer to the copper, and I can center out my line a little bit better, because right now it's a little bit off to the side. But first thing I'm going to do is going to straighten it out with the carbide peen, and then we'll figure out what we need to do. Alright guys, so we are ready for our hand sand. I was chopping away at that 2x4 a little bit just to make sure that the edge was nice and solid, and yeah, it's pretty good. The rest I gotta do is blend in all these lines and hand sand it and get it all nice and beautiful so we can etch it. And look for something to do for the handle, because I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the handle yet, but I will figure that out in a little bit. So onto the hand sand. This knife is looking very promising. So for my handle material, I decided to use this red maple burl. I had been saving up in my handle material drawer, which is actually getting pretty empty, so I'm gonna have to look for some new handle material to stock up on soon. And I'm using a black liner for the inside of the knife. It is a G10 liner, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll be pairing it up with some copper pins for this knife to tie everything up together. And it's time for our handle glue up. As always, I'm using our G-Flex and a little bit of black dye because I do have some gappage in my handle. One thing I learned while working on this knife, and I've probably had it on other knives but not as pronounced as this one, is that it's important to put some kind of sacrificial steel on the surface grinder, because these rubber wheels, no matter how hard they are, they tend to flex a little bit. So once they get off the material towards the end, it does run the risk of it eating a little bit more than it should, and I had that issue on this one, so we're hiding it away with a little black epoxy. And yeah, that'll cover up that mistake, and it is what it is. Something I've learned while I've been making knives for the last few years, but mainly now about a yearish or so, now that I've been making more higher end, more nicer knives, is that just because I have a little boo-boo doesn't mean that the knife has to go in the trash, if you know what I mean. And that has definitely discouraged me from selling a lot of the older knives that I've made, and even some of the more recent ones, because they have a minor flaw or something, or a little mistake was made. And that should not deter you from wanting to sell it. I mean, if it makes you feel better, you can always discount it a little bit, but don't sell yourself short. I mean, that little gappage in the handle covered by epoxy is not going to make a difference on the knife. It might affect its beauty, but I mean, this isn't a $3,000 piece that has to be perfect. It's probably going to be a couple $100 at most. And that is if my hoarding tendency doesn't get the best of me and I want to keep it for myself, because I mean, you'll see at the end of this video that this thing comes out absolutely gorgeous. And that little mistake, or that little problem that I didn't even know happened, shouldn't be a reason why, or should be a reason for you, if you're a knife maker like myself, to not want to, you know, sell your pieces and fund your craft. Overall, it's a very, very nice knife, and I'm very happy with it. I got it very sharp, up to 1500 grit, and overall it is an amazing knife. Another thing, the reason why I do YouTube is to document my growth, and how my first knives were kind of ass and these are a lot nicer, and that's just, you know, part of the game. So there's no point in me trying to hide the little mistakes that are made on these knives. It's all part of learning, and it's all part of getting better at your craft. And this knife came out absolutely gorgeous. And thank you very much, guys, for watching and supporting me, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.